Hey, let's talk about Apollo. Let's talk about backflow prevention. Backflow prevention is something I'm very passionate about. It's very important for the health and safety of our society. And it's getting to be as time goes on, as time marches on, like it always does. It's becoming more and more of an important thing to more people, which I'm happy about. Um, let's see. This catalog is freaking amazing. Okay, if you don't have this catalog, get one. Okay, you should have this. This should be at your counter. If you don't have it, make sure you get one because it shows you. The very first page of it. I mean, it shows you all the different kind of backflow prevention devices, and it shows you the different applications for them. Granted, this doesn't really take code into account. This is literally this is what it is. This is what it can do. Codes are going to tell you what you can and can't use, but I mean, it's all right there. I mean, come on, this is great, fantastic. Um, these are a couple of examples of how to read your part numbers. It kind of breaks it down for you. I'm not going to really go into that because there's a whole bunch of different Apollo parts we keep. Um, there's a couple of cross reference pages. All right, so we're going to start right here. Double check valve. Basically, it's a check valve with another check valve as a backup. It gives you some redundancy in case one of the checks fails. Sometimes you can use these and sometimes you can't. It depends on the town. It depends on the local code. Some places will let you get away with these. Some places require you to step up to an RPZ. It just depends entirely on where it's being installed at in the application. If you don't know for sure, let your contractor figure it out. Because if they need an RPZ and you give them a double check, it's a problem. That's a problem. Let's see. There's another double check. This is what an RPZ looks like. Okay, so an RPZ is basically a double check with an extra check on the bottom. So what this extra check does, and this is the primary difference between the two, this extra check, if you have a backflow event of any kind, if either one of these checks activate, that changes the pressure inside this third check. That's why it's called a reduced pressure zone or reduced pressure principle, however you pronounce it or say it. What will happen is this port on the bottom will start to leak. So that's what makes these well, not necessarily better, but that's why a lot of places require these, because on a double check, if you have a backflow event, a lot of times you don't have a way to know. There's no way to really know if you had a backflow event or not. On an RPZ, water will leak out of it on the bottom of it. If it's leaking, you know you got a problem. You got a backflow event. So that's why these are required in a lot of places now, because it actually gives you a visual indication that there's a problem versus a double check, which does not. There's one hanging off a hydrant. That's cool. There's a stainless steel one there. That one's a little bit fancier. It's got a what is that added on there? There's a whole lot of reading. There's some kind of like a water meter there, I think. Okay. Pressure vacuum breakers. Yeah, you're not going to really see those very often for backflow prevention around here. I want to say these are more common the farther south you go. But basically what that does is it's... I'm trying to think of how to explain it. I've never actually seen one installed, but I know they're not very common around here. You're not going to run across this very often. I don't think there's many areas in North Carolina where these are approved. That's more, like I said, the farther south you go, the more likely you're going to run across one of these. That's not really something you need to know about. And they got all kinds of, like, that's, there's a double check. That's like for a fire riser type thing, I believe. Yeah. Different styles right there. There's another big one right there. Some drawings. Ooh, that's a valve setter. Those are pretty cool. They have, I mean, and there's all different kinds of designs of these things. So they make one that'll cross with just about anything you could ever possibly imagine. But these are all, these are kind of beyond the scope of this. If you want to learn about them, you definitely should. But you're not, but as far as like residential use, you're not going to see anything like that. That's more of a specialized thing you're not going to see very often. So I'm not going to go too in depth with it. But like for fire risers and stuff like that, that's when this stuff gets really interesting. There's the atmospheric vacuum breaker. Let's see. There's a dual check. There's another. That's a dual check we keep. So, double check or dual check? What's the difference? Well, I'm trying to think of how to explain it. On a double check, if there's a pressure difference between the two checks, that basically will force the other check to activate. On this one right here, it doesn't really work that way. Literally, it's just you have a check to stop the water, and if that one fails, you have another check to stop the water. There's no funky stuff going on with like pressure differentials in here. It's much simpler, but it also means it's not as effective as a backflow prevention device. I don't really want to go too into detail with that, but that's more or less the difference. On these, the main time you're going to see dual checks be installed will be in like restaurants, soda machines. You'll see them on soda, like soft drink machines. Sometimes you'll see them on like wash stations for like dishwashing stations on your hoses. Sometimes you're required to put those on. I actually have a customer that he installs them for that reason. But otherwise, you're not going to really run across these all that much. This little beverage, and this is actually meant for what I was just talking about for the carbonated beverage backflow. I don't think we actually keep these. We were keeping a Watts. It's fairly equivalent. I think it's brass instead of plastic though. So that's something I'm gonna look into because I'd like to start keeping these because I've had people ask for them. There's your hose vacuum breakers. You know, if you shut the water off, water tries to go the wrong way, the check will activate and the water will squirt out the sides. This is a slightly more advanced version of that on those two there. It's a freeze protection valve. These, you're not going to see these around here. That's kind of an oddball. Y strainers. Apollo makes a couple different kinds of Y strainers, different materials. Basically what that does is, if the water's going to flow this way, if there's any kind of sediment or dirt or junk in it, the idea is the junk will settle down into the bottom here and get caught. There's usually a screen right here. You can take this, you can unthread that and pull that out, and you can clean it. But these have to be oriented where gravity can do the work. This has to be pointing down for that to work properly. Thermal expansion relief valve. You're not going to really see those all that often either. Expansion tanks. Those are handy. What is that? That's a test kit. That's an RPZ test kit. Let's see. Some valve setters and a couple different valves. Shut-off valves. So this section here is if you're having to custom make stuff, because they'll you can configure these in any number of combinations, and then it goes into your pressure drop calculators, all the different curves and all the math involved there, because this can get really complicated if you're having to engineer a system. But we're not going to go into that. It goes over all of them. So that pretty well covers that. Apollo makes good stuff. I like Apollo. I believe in it. I haven't had any major issues with them. So far, so good. I'm hoping that we keep them. But if you run into something with this, I mean, just reach out and ask questions if you're not sure. Especially if it's somebody who doesn't know any better and they come in and ask, well, what kind of backflow do I need? I live in this town, and you have no idea and they have no idea. Well, you better find out. You can either tell them to find out, or if you want to jump to some hoops, maybe call If you know any plumbers that work in that area that might mess with backflows, maybe they might know, or maybe you can pick your coworkers' brains, or even call me. I might know. But just be careful with that. Make sure you sell them what's actually allowed by code in the area they live in. But again, this I believe in this stuff. Backflow prevention is extremely important. So get it right. Okay.